While driving alone on a county road at 2:47 a.m. with nothing but static on the radio, and 40 miles of dark between me and home, a figure appeared in my passenger seat and told me 3 things about the afterlife that rearranged my entire understanding of reality. If you've ever driven at night with your thoughts louder than the engine, you know that particular kind of alone where the dashboard lights feel like the only proof you still exist. I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't drunk. I was just finishing the kind of shift that grinds your soul against your ribs. 18 hours on a psychiatric crisis line, 12 calls, 3 involuntary holds, 2 kids who wouldn't make it past their 20s no matter how good my de-escalation scripts were. I was driving home on autopilot, hands at 10 and 2, mind somewhere between numb and screaming, when the air in the truck changed temperature and a man made of light that didn't burn sat down next to me like we'd carpooled before. He said his name was Chamuel. He said he guides people through the transition most call death, and tonight he was here to correct 3 lies my culture had taught me so thoroughly I didn't know I was living inside them. The first lie, that consciousness ends when the brain stops. The second, that we're judged by an external force. The third, that the afterlife is one destination instead of infinite rooms organized by what you practiced loving. What happened in the next 19 minutes, and what I verified the next day in ways that made my skeptical brain sit down and stop arguing, shook me harder than any call I've ever taken, any grief I've ever held, any certainty I thought I'd built my life on. If you work nights, if you've ever wondered what happens in the minutes after the last breath, if you need instructions instead of platitudes, stay. This story is built for retention because it's built from detail, the exact mile marker where he appeared, the 3 pieces of evidence he left that I could touch with my hands, and the 5-step ritual he gave me that changed how I do my job, my grief, and my 2 a.m. drives home. Settle in. Turn off the captions if you need to hear the tone. This one asks for your full attention. Interstate 64, mile marker 187. 2 lanes of asphalt that West Virginia forgot to repave. A Tuesday that felt like it had been Friday 3 times already. My name is Nathan Cross, 36. Crisis counselor for a hotline that covers 4 counties and every flavor of human desperation you can name, and 6 you haven't thought of yet. I'm the voice that answers when someone dials the number on the back of a pill bottle at 3 a.m. because the silence got too loud and the ceiling started whispering suggestions. 18 hours is a long shift when every hour contains a choice someone else is making about whether to stay or go, and you're the grammar between those 2 verbs. That night, I'd talked down a 17-year-old girl standing on a freeway overpass with her phone in one hand and her shoes in the other because she'd read somewhere that jumping without shoes made it more certain. I'd stayed on the line with a 62-year-old man whose wife had died 4 months ago, and he'd just swallowed a bottle of his own heart medication because he couldn't figure out how to make coffee for one. I'd listened to a mother describe finding her son blue in the bathroom and then ask me if there was a prayer that worked retroactively. By the time my shift ended at 2:30, I wasn't tired. I was a frequency that had forgotten what the original note sounded like. I got in my truck, checked my mirrors out of habit, pulled onto the county road that becomes the interstate if you're patient for 12 miles, and drove in the specific kind of silence that working crisis lines teaches you to wear like a coat. The radio was static, which is typical in the hollows where mountains argue with satellites about who owns the sky. My phone was on the passenger seat, face down, because even looking at it made my chest tight. The yellow dashes on the asphalt came at me in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, a metronome for people too tired to keep their own time. At mile marker 187, exactly where the road bends around the hill that used to be a coal seam, the air in the truck changed. Not temperature, though it did get warmer, but density. The way air feels different before a thunderstorm when the pressure drops and birds stop lying about being confident. I glanced at the passenger seat. A man sat there, seatbelt on, hands folded in his lap like he'd been riding shotgun since I left the parking lot, and I'd just now noticed. He was tall, maybe 6'3" if height matters, when someone is composed of intersecting beams of golden light that don't have a source. The face was human adjacent, 2 eyes that didn't blink but also didn't stare, a mouth that didn't move but somehow smiled in the way good news smiles before it speaks. He wore something that looked like robes made from patience and geometry, and he smelled faintly like cedar and rain, which my brain tried to rationalize as the air freshener I don't have. "Don't swerve," he said, and the voice wasn't sound. It was certainty, arriving directly in the part of my head where I keep emergency protocols. "You're not hallucinating. You're not having a breakdown. You're not dying. You're being visited, and I need you to keep your hands on the wheel while I explain why." I kept my hands on the wheel because when a luminous stranger gives you driving tips, you listen. "Who are you?" I asked, voice steadier than I expected, which probably says more about my job than my courage. "Chamuel," he said, and the name felt old, older than the road, older than the mountains, old in the way stones are old when they've stopped keeping track. "I guide souls through the crossing. Tonight I'm here because you asked a question 3 hours ago that was loud enough to reach me." "What question?" I asked, genuinely confused because I ask 100 questions a shift, and most of them are variations on, "Are you safe right now?" "The one you didn't say out loud," Chamuel answered. "After the boy in the bathroom, after the mother asked for the retroactive prayer, you stood in the break room staring at the coffee machine and thought, 'Where do they go? Not heaven, not hell. Where exactly do they go when I can't save them?'" He was right. I'd thought exactly that, word for word, while the coffee dripped and my hands shook from adrenaline I couldn't use, because there was no one left to save and no protocol for processing a shift where the score was 12 interventions, 2 failures, 10 maybes. "So where do they go?" I asked, and my voice cracked not from grief, but from the sudden understanding that I was about to get an answer to the question that's been gnawing my sternum since the first call I ever took. "3 truths," Chamuel said, holding up 3 fingers made of light that bent without breaking. "Your culture taught you 3 lies so deeply that they've become the walls of your reality. I'm here to open the windows." First truth: consciousness doesn't end when the brain stops. It expands. The brain is a filter, not a generator. Death is the moment the filter breaks and you remember how big you've always been. "Prove it," I said, because crisis work teaches you to ask for evidence before you change your protocols. "Pull over at the next exit," he said. "Bluefield rest stop. Check your phone. You'll have a text from a number you don't recognize, time-stamped at 2:51 4 minutes ago. The message will say, 'Nathan, I made it. The coffee's better here.' It's from Marcus Webb, the man with the heart medication. He died at 2:49. His consciousness texted you at 2:51 because 2 minutes after death he still remembered your voice and wanted to close the loop. I took the exit doing 70 because my hands do what my brain tells them, even when my brain isn't sure it's in charge anymore. The rest stop was empty, except for a semi with Kansas plates and a sedan with fogged windows that suggested either teenagers or ghosts. I pulled into the spot under the light that flickers like it's got opinions, put the truck in park, and picked up my phone. 1 new message. Unknown number. 2:51 a.m. "Nathan, I made it. The coffee's better here." I stared at the screen until the letters stopped being letters and started being evidence my skepticism couldn't digest. "Marcus," I whispered, because when the dead text you, whispering feels appropriate. "Yes," Chamuel said from the passenger seat that now felt less like my truck and more like a chapel on wheels. He didn't need a phone. Consciousness doesn't need instruments. It borrows them when the message matters. He wanted you to know that where he went isn't empty. It's full. I set the phone down before I dropped it. My hands were shaking in the way they shake after a successful de-escalation, when your body realizes the threat is gone, but doesn't know how to file the leftover adrenaline. "Second truth," Chamuel continued, ignoring my crisis because I suspect celestial guides have seen worse. "You're not judged by an external force. You're met by your own accumulated choices reflected back with clarity. There's no gavel, no courtroom, no sentencing. There's a room where you see every moment of your life from every perspective. Yours, theirs, the dogs, the strangers on the bus. You feel what you caused, not as punishment, as education." "That sounds like hell," I said, thinking of every call I'd fumbled, every script I'd read too fast, every time I'd put someone on hold because 2 lines were ringing, and I had to make a choice about whose crisis was louder. "It sounds like hell if you lived cruelly," he agreed. "It feels like coming home if you lived with more kindness than efficiency. You, Nathan, will spend that room mostly crying from relief." The boy you couldn't save? He'll show you the moment you said his name with respect instead of pity, and that moment is still ringing in him louder than the method he chose. The mother. She'll show you that your voice on the phone kept her standing long enough for her daughter to arrive. You don't get to see those outcomes in real time. You get to see them in the room. It's not judgment. It's math. I wanted to argue, to ask about Hitler and serial killers and people who definitely deserve a gavel. But Samuel raised one luminous hand. The cruel ones spend longer in the room. They feel every ounce of pain they caused as if it's their own, because in that space it is. No one escapes the math, but no one is discarded. Eventually, even the cruelest consciousness softens enough to widen. It takes time. Time works differently there. But infinity is patient. Third truth, he said. And the light around him brightened without getting harsh, the way dawn brightens when it remembers it's supposed to be gentle. The afterlife isn't one destination. It's infinite rooms organized by what you practiced loving. If you loved learning, you go to the libraries. If you loved building, you go to the workshops. If you loved feeding people, you go to the kitchens. If you loved silence, you go to the forests that don't have names. You don't get assigned. You get attracted, the way a magnet is attracted to iron. What you practiced in life becomes the room you rest in after. What about people who didn't love anything? I asked, thinking of the callers who phone in with voices so flat they sound like they've been ironed. They go to the room for people learning to love, he said simply. It's the biggest room. It has the most teachers. It's not a punishment. It's a practicum. They learn by watching others love until the concept stops being theoretical and starts being muscle memory. Then they choose their next room. I sat with that for a mile of silence while the truck idled and the semi with Kansas plates pulled out, exhaust cutting through the cold like a sigh. Why are you telling me this? I asked, finally landing on the question under the question. Because you're a threshold worker, Samuel said. You stand at the edge where people decide to stay or go. You need to know what's on the other side so you can stop fearing it on their behalf. Fear leaks. They feel your fear even when you're reading the script perfectly. I'm here to replace your fear with information. Information doesn't save everyone, but it saves some. And some is the only math that matters in your line of work. What do I do with this? I asked, suddenly exhausted in a new way. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing the walls you've been pushing against were never load-bearing. 5 practices, Samuel said, and I recognized the tone. It was the same tone I use when I'm giving someone a safety plan and I need them to write it down. 1. Before every shift, sit in your truck for 60 seconds and imagine the room you'll rest in after. Not heaven. Your room. The one organized by what you love. Let that room remind you that the people you're about to talk to are going to rooms too, and fear of the wrong room is what's killing them faster than method. 2. After a call you couldn't save, say their name out loud and add "you made it." Not as a prayer, as a fact. They made it somewhere organized by what they practiced. Even if that room is learning to love, they made it. Certainty is a gift you can give yourself when the protocol stops working. 3. Once a week, text someone who's alive and say, "I'm glad you stayed." Don't explain. Don't wait for a reply. Plant seeds in the living, because the dead are already gardening on their side. 4. Keep a list of the calls that worked, not to brag. To remember that thresholds swing both ways. You've kept more people on this side than you know. The math is in your favor, even when the shift isn't. 5. When you drive home at 2 a.m. and the silence gets loud, say out loud, "Consciousness expands. No one is judged by strangers, and love is the only sorting mechanism that matters." Say it until the words become the road. I wrote them down in my phone's notes app with shaking thumbs. The kind of shaking that isn't fear, it's recalibration. "Will I see you again?" I asked, because when someone rearranges your cosmology in a rest stop parking lot, you want to know if there's a follow-up appointment. "When you widen," Samuel said, and the phrasing was the same as Thamiel's, Anamiel's, all the guides who apparently share a script. "Or when you cross, whichever comes first. But Nathan, you're not crossing for a long time. You've got 2 decades of threshold work left, and the second decade is when you get good at it." Then he did something I didn't expect. He reached over, without reaching, just directing attention, and touched the spot on my chest where the tightness lives. The knot that forms every time a call goes quiet in the wrong way. The knot loosened. Not gone, but manageable, like a cramped muscle that finally remembered it's allowed to breathe. "Drive safe," he said. And then he wasn't there. The passenger seat was empty, except for a faint scent of cedar and a warmth that stayed in the fabric longer than physics usually allows. I sat in the truck for another 10 minutes, scrolling back to the text from Marcus. 2:51 a.m. "Nathan, I made it. The coffee's better here," I replied, even though I knew the number wouldn't ring anywhere. "Glad you made it. Save me a seat." Then I drove the rest of the way home doing exactly the speed limit, because when celestial beings give you driving instructions, you don't push your luck. The next morning, I verified everything I could verify. I called the hospital where Marcus had been transported. Time of death, 2:49 a.m. I checked my phone logs. No record of any outgoing or incoming call at 2:51 except the text from the unknown number, which my carrier confirmed didn't match any active line in their system. I asked a tech friend to trace it. He called me back an hour later and said, "This is going to sound insane, but the metadata says the text originated from your phone, like you texted yourself, but you didn't. I checked your activity log. You were driving, both hands on the wheel based on your GPS tracking speed consistency. Nathan, what the hell is going on?" I didn't tell him. I said it was a glitch, thanked him, and hung up. Some evidence isn't for sharing. It's for keeping in your chest where the knot used to be. The practices became rituals, the way instructions become religion when you do them enough times to notice they work. Before every shift, I sit in the truck for 60 seconds and imagine my room. A library with a wood stove and windows that overlook something I haven't named yet. After the calls I can't save, I say their name and add, "You made it," and my voice has stopped shaking when I say it, because I mean it now. Once a week I text someone, "I'm glad you stayed." Sometimes they ask why, mostly they just say thanks or send a heart emoji, and that's enough. I keep a list in a notebook labeled "Thresholds That Held," and on the nights when the math feels bad, I read it until the math corrects itself. And when I drive home at 2 a.m. with 40 miles of dark and nothing but my thoughts, I say out loud, "Consciousness expands. No one is judged by strangers, and love is the only sorting mechanism that matters." I say it until the words become the road, until the road becomes the room I'll rest in someday. And the fear that used to ride shotgun gets out at the first exit and doesn't ask for a ride back. If you work nights, if you stand at thresholds, if you've ever wondered what happens when the calls go quiet, here's what I know now. They go somewhere organized by what they practiced, and you're not saving them from nothing. You're buying them time to practice something better. The afterlife isn't a courtroom, it's a campus. And consciousness doesn't end when the brain stops. It expands into the size it always was, and the only thing that follows you is the shape of what you loved. If this helped you breathe, subscribe. If you've met a guide on a back road, drop the mile marker in the comments. And if you're driving home alone tonight, check your passenger seat. You might not be as alone as you think.